welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C. Now, the Kiev fascist clique has gone on a killing rampage in eastern Ukraine. In doing so, I gather that they have signed their own death warrant at this point. But what they've done is order certain military units under their control. There are some of the, what can we say, the regular army of Ukraine, if there is such a thing. But the principal forces engaged are the actual Sturmabteilungen, right? The outright fascist forces of right sector. And the way that they've covered this, right, the technicality they've used is they say, oh, the Geneva Accord told us to disarm the illegal armed groups, but we've legalized them. We have, in effect, incorporated them into a legal force, or the color of legality at least, which is the National Guard. So when you hear National Guard vis-a-vis this Kiev fascist cabal, National Guard means right sector, and that means the worst. Nazis, fascists, they're as bad as anything that there's ever been. So the news this morning is that this group is attacking some cities in eastern Ukraine, and they've started with Sloviansk. Now, Sloviansk is a key place because it has some militant people there, and because it's situated on that key road from Rostov-on-Don there in the southeast towards Kharkov, the second largest city of Ukraine, and it's one way that you'd have to get supplies in from Russia, although there are other ways much more directly across the border. Better yet, if you take Kharkov, you're going to want to go down that road to roll up the fascist forces there in eastern Ukraine. Some guy wrote me an email saying, I'm from Ukraine, I never met a fascist. Well, I suggest you go see Yarosh and Chanibok and the leadership of Right Sector and the leadership of the Svoboda Party, and maybe that will handle it for you. The situation this morning now is, according to Turchinov, many Russian dead, pro-Russian dead. Turchinov, the Putsch president, the top fascist in the Kiev clique at the moment, an ally, of course, of Timoshenko, the gas princess, and kleptocrat. So Turchinov, many are dead. The attack started at in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning or so. Typical fascist sneak attack in this area of Sloviansk, and this is carried out in part by having these commandos rappel from helicopters, but in the process, at least 2 of the fascist helicopters have been shot down, and it may be as many as 4 fascist helicopters shot down. We're beginning to see rocket-propelled grenades and these light bazookas showing up more. What does that mean? Well, it means that they don't want to be sitting ducks. The technique is therefore that of the Nazi Einsatzgruppe, where you'd have the SS go in, and they would provide the framework, the umbrella for the operation, and then you'd have the Hilfswillige, right? The Hilfswillige, or Hebes, would be the right sector in this case. So they go in and actually do the killing. So many killed on the pro-Russian side, according to Turchinov, at least 2 helicopters shot down, and whatever happened to pilots and crews, that's anybody's guess. So that attack is coming. I think I said last week it's likely that something will happen on the 2nd of May. Well, there has been a large Russian, pro-Russian move this past week, which is the taking of the city of Lugansk, one of the 5 or 6 largest in the country, I believe, and that has been pretty much wrapped up by the pro-Russian side. The progress made by the pro-Russians was to seize about a dozen buildings, including those in Lugansk. There was an attempt by the fascists to storm the town of Mariupol down on the Black Sea coast, or Sea of Azov coast, whatever it is, and that was repelled. And this was so humiliating that the component of the Kiev fascist clique, Avakov, we know Avakov, A-V-A-K-O-V, Interior Minister. This is the guy we know as the jailbird, because he's the one who was put into prison in Rome because of his international real estate crimes and financial crimes. So I think the situation for these characters looks ominous for the Kiev characters. The other thing, the action has been extended to Odessa, and I think we don't need to pretend here, right? This is Novorossiya. It looks to me like Putin's intent is to use these methods that we've seen in Crimea to detach the entire Black Sea coast, reaching over to Odessa, which is the second port. It's a significant port. It's a large Russian city, traditionally Russian, absolutely no doubt about it. This is where we had the 1905 revolution, right? The Potemkin steps going down to the port. You've seen it, Battleship Potemkin by Eisenstein. That's Russia. So that corridor, which is more than a corridor, is going to leave Ukraine. Essentially what you're going to have is starting somewhat west of Kiev and going as far as it goes. You're going to have a landlocked Ukraine, which is centered on Lvov, essentially, on the fascist metropole of Lvov, and that will be the end of that, so that this will be a landlocked state, and it will not have any window onto the Black Sea. So that's all happening. Odessa, a big step forward, right? Bigger than Lugansk in some ways, but these are all big steps forward. In the course of the past week, we had the fascist leader Turchinov say the Ukrainian regime is helpless to maintain public order in eastern Ukraine. Well, at that point, under international law going back centuries, if there's a country that's your neighbor on your border, and they have chaos, anarchy, killing, and so forth going on, and that government is impotent to restore public order, then you have, under international law, the right to send in your forces to restore order. And that is in some ways the root of this entire responsibility to protect, which we know people like Samantha Power and Bernard Kouchner, they believe in so much, right? The R2P. Well, R2P is intervene to restore order, and I think they're going to get a dose of their own medicine. Now, in the course of the week, Putin made this very interesting remark saying, well, if they go ahead and try to hit us with sanctions, then we're going to have to look at foreign companies that are active in critical sectors of our economy, such as, for example, energy. And that means watch out, stockholders of ExxonMobil. Watch out, stockholders of Chevron. That means you. And if you allow Obama and this crew to push ahead with these idiotic sanctions, then you will get a haircut. You will be left holding the bag. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Let me just mention, if you're interested in showing some solidarity with Russia in this time of hysteria, right? We've got Professor Stephen Cohen and his wife, who runs the Nation magazine, right? This is Katrina vanden Heuvel of the famous CIA or OSS family. They say, oh, it's so terrible. There's no movement against this foreign adventurism, possible aggression, possible war that we had, right? People were demonstrating against the Iraq War and so forth. Well, the voice of Russia, right? Voice of Russia, somewhat, I think, significantly better line than RT. In other words, not so fawning for Snowden and Ron Paul and Assange and these people, right? More like the voice of Russia rather than RT. Who knows what that means? The voice of Russia will actually send you a St. George's ribbon. And this is important now. A week from today, here it is May 2nd in Washington. A week from today will be the 9th of May. This is when Russia, the Soviet Union, celebrates the victory over Nazism and fascism in World War II. Here in the West, it's actually the 8th of May. This need not concern us at the moment. So what you ought to do is go to the Voice of Russia page on the Internet, and you'll see that they're offering the St. George's ribbon, pro-Russian ribbon. It's actually orange and black, isn't it, with stripes? And they'll actually send you one. So you've just got to send them a mailing address, and that's a nice gesture. Right now, the UN Security Council is meeting, and I don't have reports on what's going on. I can imagine. Let's just go back to Putin for a second. He said, look, in terms of energy, we have to review the foreign companies that we've got working here in case these sanctions come down. Good idea for the presidents of ExxonMobil and Chevron to call up the White House and say, no, 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 no. Not for those fascists in Kiev who won't fight. What kind of fascists are they? They don't even fight. Right? It's one thing to be a fire-breathing aggressor. We've seen that. Not good. But even more pathetic is a fascist who whines and says, we're helpless, says Turchinov. This is sort of postmodern fascism, I guess. All right. So Putin made the comments on energy. Putin then, yesterday, told the Ukrainian fascist group, you have to get your army out of southeast Ukraine. You got to get out of the south and the east. And that, of course, was to try to head off this terrible confrontation that's going on right now. This morning, the word from the Kremlin is, this is from Putin and from his spokesman, Peskov, that the Geneva deal is dead. That was the attempt to disarm the armed groups to get everybody out of buildings, everybody out of public squares. They never did it. And the Ukraine regime is still claiming that they are scrupulously respecting the Geneva deal. So the current attack was preceded, I think we mentioned, by the fall of Avakov, the jailbird, and he has now been replaced by the head of the SBU, the equivalent of the CIA, or BND, or DGSE, one of these. So this is now in an escalated combat phase, and we'll have to see about that. I should have mentioned on the Einsatzgruppe, the most, or quite detailed and authoritative account of this, there's a book called Ordinary Men by a historian by the name of Browning, and he describes the Einsatzgruppe and the Hiwis and how this is all done. The IMF has extended a helping hand to the fascist clique, although, watch out, it comes with conditionalities, right? And the conditionalities are, of course, genocidal austerity against the Ukrainian people. It's one of the big things that's destroying this puppet regime. We saw Madame Lagarde, alias Lagarce. Madame Lagarce came out this week and said, we had to act quickly to save the situation there. But, of course, they're demanding their entire neoliberal wish list of lunatic genocidal austerity, double the price of gas, destroy the social safety net, gut the services, and so forth. They promised $17 billion. The immediately deliverable is at the very most, $3.5 billion. Most of that is owed to Russia. Let's see if they pay. That problem of paying for the natural gas underlines again the folly of attempting to have an independent Ukraine. It cannot be economically viable, and it therefore fails to meet the test that Rosa Luxemburg set up. Can this state, this entity, right, the Staatsgebilde, can it exist on its own? And the answer is always no. I think Russia would have a way to make Ukraine a profitable going concern, right? What with Donetsk, Donbass, Kryvyi Rog, iron, steel, coal, all the rest of it. That could be very, very important. Now we have Merkel here. This is the Chancellor of Germany, otherwise known on this program as Die Dumme Kuh, the former commie who came out of East Germany, right? She was told that capitalism is theft, and she wants to put this into action. So Merkel is here. Now, Merkel's message is actually, we hope, maybe not the worst for the U.S. Characters to hear. And this is that German business does not want to sacrifice itself for the sake of this gaggle of fascists. He doesn't. Chanibok and Yarosh are not a good reason to destroy your company among German business leaders. So the ones that are on record now saying no to further sanctions, we have Siemens, and Siemens is prominent because the chief executive of Siemens, Joe Kaeser, visited Putin at his dacha and got his picture taken. We also have Gerhard Schröder, former SPD chancellor, who had his birthday also celebrated in St. Petersburg with Putin. But Siemens, BASF chemicals, right? Volkswagen automobiles, Adidas sports shoes and so forth, Deutsche Bank derivatives, Daimler-Benz, the Mercedes-Benz company, and on and on. I think also Henkel, they make soap powders, things like this. I think these are all companies that have basically told Merkel, die dumme Kuh, to back off and, let's not hear too much about Ukraine, right? Let those fascists take care of their own, let them fight their own battles. Good maxim. Back in a minute. The story of the OSCE monitors, right? OSCE, the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe. It's the old Helsinki treaty from 1975 with slightly different membership. A group of these characters traveling in OSCE vehicles was rounded up by Ponomaryov, Vyacheslav Ponomaryov. Ponomaryov there in Sloviansk captured them. So who do we have? 5 Ukrainian military and or SBU, that is Ukrainian CIA types. Let's see, 4 German officers, including a colonel, ein Oberst, Schneider. So the German officers were 4, 3 normal and 1 able to translate, but all of them German military officers, then 1 each from Poland, Denmark, Sweden, Czech Republic. So a broad spectrum of NATO forces. And what were they doing? Were they from the OSCE? No, they were not. And you can look at my Twitter feed to see all the ins and outs. I've sent out the tweet from the OSCE where they say, no, these are not our people. It's not us. These are military. They're there under something called the Vienna document, whatever that is, and they're not the OSCE, and they're not diplomats. They're all military officers. Military officers out of uniform behind enemy lines are what? Well, traditionally they're spies, and that may be what these people are doing. They're in a big bus, And in the bus, they had explosives and lots of ammunition. What could that be? A false flag, perhaps? Something like, trying to set up a new Gladio, as if they didn't already have it. It's called Right Sector. So you get the idea. So these people are captured. The one from Sweden is sick, so they let him go. They're still being held, and Ponomaryov wants to trade them. Now, where do these people come from, the Germans? It's a bilateral German-Ukrainian operation. It's not the OSCE. Do not believe it. It is not the OSCE. Klaus Neukirch of the OSCE went on television in Vienna, Austria last Friday evening, a week ago today, saying, and he says, these are not from us. The woman, the interviewer says to him, well, don't you do a risk profile before you do these things? He says, yeah, normally we do, but in this case we didn't because it's not our mission. Nicht unser Besuch, not our visit. That's the ORF. And you can find the same thing in Deutsche Welle, written all in German, except for what I've contributed. Take a look at Tarpley.net. Tarpley.net has my intervention on Press TV last Sunday night. That, again, these are not from the OSCE. They are pure NATO military, what we used to call the Hartruhe, right, the German Defense Ministry. And where are they from? Well, there's this place called Geilenkirchen. Geilenkirchen is a big NATO base north of Aachen, and this is where the AWACS airplanes fly from. So this is top-level NATO military intelligence, reconnaissance, observation, and they're a unit of the Bundeswehr, the German army, called the Zentrum für Verifikationsaufgaben, Center for Verification Tasks, or maybe enforcement tasks if it's an arms control treaty, but verification. Trust but verify. Well, verify these guys. They're all from the Bundeswehr. And the leader is a colonel. He's not a diplomat. So that's who you have. And the comedy was that they were taken probably last Thursday, and the negotiations were originally in the hands of the German Defense Ministry. But this was embarrassing. So the German Defense Ministry and others had to lean mightily on the OSCE, saying, look, keep up our camouflage. Don't blow our cover. We're trying to create the illusion that these people are from the OSCE, and don't you get in the way or else. All right, fine. So that's what they did. But then they tried to get Lamberto Zanier, an Italian diplomat, is the general secretary of the OSCE, and Deshitsia, the Ukrainian foreign minister, was saying on Saturday and Sunday of last week, Zanier is coming. He's going to negotiate. He wants to come and talk to these to the pro-Russians, to Ponomaryov and others. But Zanier didn't and hasn't, as far as I can see. He never went. And the other problem is that there's a rotating presidency, which is not being general secretary, but sort of being a figurehead. And the guy doing that is Swiss, and he seems to be more willing to play along than Zanier. Zanier is from far northeast Italy. He's not playing along with that so much. The Russian foreign ministry says, look, if you're going to do the Vienna documents, you've got to do notification, and you did not. And you would have to notify Ponomaryov and company, as well as the People's Republic of Donetsk in Donetsk, since that's the one that calls itself a government. But you didn't do that, did you? So those guys are being held. So let's not waste any tears about them. We hope that a prisoner exchange can be arranged because, of course, the Kiev fascist clique had kidnapped, arrested a number of mass popular leaders in those eastern cities that really ought to be given their freedom, and then you could have an exchange, and that would work fine. So that and you can see what is the goal of this. We just went through all of those German companies that don't want to hear about sanctions. No more sanctions. Nix sanctions nix Sanktionen, they say. Well, then you've got to get some hysteria going, and what better way than to allege that these 4 German officers are really diplomats and they're really being held by nasty Ponomaryov, even though they're from the OSCE. So there you have that, and of course, as I think the Russian Foreign Ministry said today, this attack now on Sloviansk is not helping the condition of those guys, right? Maybe one of the goals of this is that the right sector would like to kill all of those officers and then try to pin that on Ponomaryov and his forces. All right. Now, Breedlove, the NATO commander, is a jerk. Breedlove of NATO, and he says, "Oh, look, we're sending these troops, these token forces, 150 here and there, Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland. This just to reassure them it's all defensive. Don't worry. You're a fool, Breedlove." And what this actually shows is the American people never knew what was being sold to them. This is now one of the crimes of Clinton. Clinton is responsible. Under Clinton, NATO expansion was pushed. In 1990-1991, Manfred Werner, the head of NATO, said, "We are not going to push NATO to the east. We're not even going to push it into the eastern part of Germany. We're going to leave East Germany free of NATO." And that maybe, according to some, has been respected. But what good is that if you then push on to Poland and Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia, practically to the gates of St. Petersburg? It is time to roll back that folly of NATO expansion that now makes the United States the slave to hotheads, fascists, revanchists, lunatics in all of these little countries that need to learn to get along with Russia, but now we've encouraged, their most adventurous sort of politics, right? Netanyahu-style leaders have the upper hand in most of these places. Right? See the Kaczynski twins and the people in those Baltic states. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. It's May 2nd. In terms of anniversaries, right, this coming week, Grant and Sherman, 150 years ago, began to move south to crush slavery, one of the greatest victories for humanity and one of the greatest defeats for oligarchy and, to be sure, the British Empire that were backing the Confederate States of America. So there may be some reenactments at the Wilderness and Spotsylvania, and all of that is coming up now. North Anna, Cold Harbor, Petersburg, from now, May, June, July, the Petersburg siege then begins, and similarly, Sherman begins to proceed down Dalton and Resaca and Ezra Church, Peachtree Creek, a whole series of flanking maneuvers, right, which were one of the main studies of von Moltke the Elder. So we'll be following all that as time permits. Breedlove, we should sack this Breedlove and get busy rolling back this folly of NATO expansion, which has essentially mortgaged now the future of the United States to a bunch of adventurers like Yarosh and Chanibok. This is intolerable. Okay. In terms of the greater world historical significance, right? Here we have an interesting article. Christopher R. Hill, former U.S. Secretary of State for East Asia, has been ambassador to Iraq, South Korea, Macedonia, Poland, Kosovo, Dayton Peace Accords, North Korea, all the rest of it. So, fairly significant State Department figure. On a website called Project Syndicate, which is opinion pieces, op-eds, his article of April 21st, The End of the New World Order. The End of the New World Order. I'm sure Ron Paul is disappointed because Ron Paul was supporting globalization worldwide free trade and a worldwide currency. But for Christopher Hill now, it's the end of the New World Order. He writes, Russia's annexation of Crimea and intimidation of Ukraine appear to mean the end of a 25-year period whose hallmark was an effort to bring Russia into greater alignment with Euro-Atlantic goals and traditions. Now the question is, what comes next? The challenge is not so much Ukraine. Ukraine will continue to lurch from one crisis to the next, as it has for this time, 23 years. More, it's a problem of Russia and regression, recidivism, and revanchism. Well, the three R's of Christopher Hill. What he's complaining about is the globalized system, right? The neoliberal absolute primacy and even sacred quality of predatory, parasitical speculation. And indeed, the backup of that was NATO running wild across the earth with really no break, no check. And that, I also believe, is ending. So I welcome that. We've just got to make sure that it goes far enough and fast enough. Now, in this regard, we have the distinguished Russian economist Sergei Glaziev, and he has been putting out in the second half of April at a meeting of the Moscow Business Forum and other settings. He has put forward a series of economic measures, self-defense, dirigism. I think it's one of the Russian publications says Glaziev is a dirigist. Yes, dirigist, protectionist, neo-mercantilist. You can call it what you like. This is what Cassius Clay, Lincoln's ambassador, was trying to convince the Russian manufacturing class to drop free trade and go with protectionism, and that was the night the British ambassador's aide freaked out. So Glaziev says, let's get ready, let's be ready if the U.S. hits us with heavy sanctions. Notice Glaziev himself personally has been sanctioned, right, along with Rogozin and some of the oligarchs, frankly, that are close to Putin. He makes clear one obvious one that will get everybody's attention, right? If we are sanctioned by the U.S. in a heavy-duty way, we must default on all U.S. loans. Don't pay. Of course not. What, are you crazy? You're not going to pay. Others in Moscow had talked about confiscation of U.S. investments and property. That's certainly a definite possibility, right? Remember, the great principle of international affairs is reciprocity. You do something to them, they are guaranteed to do it to you as soon as they can and as soon as they're capable. Now, he also wants to increase the international role of the ruble. This is a good thing. The only thing is you got to realize what it takes. And what it takes is a broad, deep, liquid treasury bond, treasury bill market, GKO market. You've got to be able to handle $1 trillion a day and $4 or $5 trillion on special days without batting an eye. And that takes some doing. Right? It took the U.S. 100 years to get more or less to that point. He also wants to transfer Russian assets that have to be abroad from aggressive pro-NATO countries to other countries that are more neutral. And then the most interesting part comes when he says, if we're cut off from foreign lending, if we can't get loans from the London market, if we can't float Eurobond loans or whatever it is, then we've got to go to an autarchical system. The autarchical system would be having the Russian central bank deliver cheap, long-term credit for production. Does that sound familiar? Cheap, long-term credit for production. This is essentially a version of what I have been recommending these many years, which is a credit stimulus, 0% or as close to that as you can get it, 0% long-term century bonds if needed, and preferentially channeled into productive activity, infrastructure, and agriculture and manufacturing as a means of keeping the national economy going. So this is the interesting part of Glaziev. It's a very interesting package. The thing that he doesn't seem to have, and maybe I'm just haven't got the right forms of his statement, you're going to have currency controls and exchange controls. This was already true for Mahathir Mohamad and Malaysia back in the Asian contagion, almost 20 years ago now, 1998. The Asian contagion, the country that came through that best was Malaysia, because they put in exchange controls and capital controls. That's what you're going to have to do. And again, you have to realize, what's the story in Moscow, right? You've got two groups. The Siloviki. Siloviki are the power ministries, right? Defense Ministry, Interior Ministry, with all the police, the FSB, the KGB, and so forth, right? The people that have armed men ready to go and military hardware and so forth. So the Siloviki, in a situation of exacerbated international tension, as you have now, the Siloviki would go to the fore. But on the other side, you've got the oligarchs. And Putin, again, has always had this relation to the oligarchs since the Khodorkovsky arrest of 2003. It's, you oligarchs don't interfere in politics, and you can then get away with a lot in terms of what you do in economics. Now, the oligarchs are a chastened crew, right? Berezovsky is dead and so forth. But in the group around Putin, you have got German Gref and you've got Kudrin that I've talked about continuously. Those guys are still arguing for neoliberal economics and free trade. Back in a minute. So welcome back.